Okay. Good evening and welcome to the Tuesday, February 27th, 2024 meeting of the Elementary School Building Committee. I'll quickly review our agenda. As usual, we'll have an opportunity for public comment. Then we will approve or look to approve minutes from our last meeting, as well as some invoices that need paying. We'll hear design updates on the media center, art, STEM, and theming of the building. We'll get an update on permitting, especially as it relates to MIPA and the community outreach that's necessary for that. An update on other meetings that are going on outside of the building committee meetings. And then we will discuss the lead and passive house designations with a vote on costs for a consultant related to that. And we will look to adjourn. The agenda says 8 p.m., but with this agenda, I'm hopeful that we won't get close to that. So we start out with public comment. Doesn't look like there is anyone here for public comment, but we will entertain it if anyone shows up after this time. So next we move on to minutes. In your packet, we have minutes from our meeting of February 6th, 2024. Does anyone have any questions, comments, or edits to those minutes? Hearing none, I would seek a motion to approve the minutes of February 6th, 2024.
I make a motion to approve the minutes of February 6, 24, sir.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, I have a motion by Mike, a second by Amanda. We have no one remote tonight, so we can vote in the standard way. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstaining? And it is unanimous, 5-0. Next up, we have invoices, and we've got a lot of them. The total invoice package tonight totals $482,204.92. The first one is for is payable to Vertex, invoice number OPM 116-22, in the amount of $33,465.59. The next is payable to Perkins Eastman, invoice number 00954221-00.0-2, in the amount of $445,289.78. The next is payable to UPS in the amount of $49.55. The next is invoice number P23128-00-2, payable to Thornton Tomasetti in the amount of $2,500. The next two are both payable to Harrington Heap LLP, invoice numbers 449 and 453, payable in the amount of $517.50 and $382.50. Respectively. So again, the total amount of invoices is $482,204.92. Any questions about those invoices?
Big number.
It's a big number.
Just, I'm curious if anyone that's intimately involved with these numbers, are we on track? Are we a little bit ahead, a little bit behind, or is this fairly normal at this stage with those sorts of numbers? Any red flags, I guess, is what I'm asking.
So I'm looking at you, Dan and Bob, but if that's more of a Vertex question, I'm also perfectly happy holding on this until Chris gets here. I know he's running late.
I would say there's no red flags in that amount. That they're usually what you see with us is right now you're spending money more on us than on them. You're going to see us kind of start escalating up towards we get deeper into DD and then into CDs, and then as we get to CA, it'll really level out. We'll be much more. Then you're going to see really good bills from the contractor.
Yeah.
And the important thing is that the number that we're in this for hasn't changed.
No,
It's just the rate we get to it.
no, and I'm
Most of the
on a
work,
schedule.
most of the work by Perkins Eastman is right now.
Yeah.
And,
Looking at the cash flow, this actually is under for the month of January, to give you an idea.
Okay, thank
yeah, we didn't pay him anything last month.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. If there are none, I would seek a motion to approve the invoice package in the total amount of $482,204.92.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second.
Motion by Mike, second by Bill. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed or abstaining?
Yeah.
So unanimous, but for the recording and minutes purposes, that is 6-0, as opposed to the previous. Okay, next on the agenda, we are moving into design updates. So I will look to Perkins Eastman to walk us through this.
Great. So I have some things to share on screen. Let me get- Before I dive into some of the design, I'll say that we presented some theming ideas a few meetings ago here at the ESBC. And it was decided that it would be a great idea to involve teachers. So we've set up a series of 4 collaboration meetings to share with them some of the theming ideas that have already been developed, as well as kind of advance them and connect them to curriculum. So that is ongoing. We had our first meeting in person a few weeks ago, and we are continuing with 3 more meetings that are virtual. They occur on Fridays, so it's kind of exciting. There was genuine support and some enthusiasm for the theming that has been shown to date. It's connected to nature. It's considered kind of a timeless approach, not a trendy approach. And the simplicity of marsh, meadow, and forest was something that was appreciated, that it's something kind of quiet to work with, but is full of a lot of opportunities to connect to curriculum and to create some inspiration. So I don't know if there's anything anybody would want to add on the meeting. So.
No, just, I think the group that came together was great. I think they have a lot of, passionate ideas. I think, to your point, they're really looking for ways that we can take the design and incorporate different elements of teaching and learning throughout the building, which I think is really cool. So it was a great first meeting. Looking forward to the next few, and I think we'll move forward in a really good direction.
Great. In prior meetings here, we've shared some developments of the cafeteria, gymnasium, main lobby. More recently, we shared classroom and breakout spaces. So tonight, we're going to share the Media Center, Arts and Tech, which is somewhat at the heart of the school. What we're looking at right here, right now, is on the left-hand side of the screen is a floor plan. This is the main floor. And if you'll recall, the Media Center is actually split on 2 floors. So 1/3 of the square footage is located on the first floor, and that's intended to be more deliberately for one of the 3 grades. So grade 2 will have its collections on this main floor, and then the 2/3 would be for grades 3 and 4. On this image, you can see over here where my cursor is, this is a zoomed-in floor plan. What you're looking at is the main hallway. The lobby is off to this side, and this is the main hallway that runs by the lower side of the media center. To describe how the space is organized, if you come in the doors, they're centrally located. The librarian is straight ahead, so the circulation desk is right there. Off to one side, the right-hand side, is a teaching area for a full class. The room is surrounded by the perimeter of book shelving, which is taller around the perimeter, and then lower stacks, I believe 42 inches if they're out on the floor. Anything out on the floor is intended to be entirely movable and not disrupt visibility throughout the space. So it helps create a little separation, but is easily supervisable. The little triangles that you see here show kind of an aperture of views that we have at the top of the page. So starting with the one right at the librarian, it looks toward some loose seating areas and towards a reading or storytelling area. So that is this image here, where my cursor is circulating. You can see it's a view of the stairwell up to the 2/3 portion, the second floor portion of the media center. Underneath that stair, that space can be enclosed, but we think it's really a fun opportunity to create a little storytelling nook, a seating area. So we're having a little fun with what we do underneath. maybe pop a few windows out to the corridor, but definitely trying to make this a fun space and a functional space as well. On the right-hand side of the image, it's just a view. We've got the storytelling area, and we've created a wall with some big openings so that it has a little bit of acoustic separation, and can function as a kind of a separate storytelling area, but the visibility is still maintained. And then the reading center, we have built-in steps that are located there. You can also see there's another view that looks at the opening, basically, to the floor above. And what we have there is really a two-story wall that we're considering to be a feature wall. So as we pick up the themes, the center of the building would be forest. We can use that verticality to kind of relate to trees, the growth of trees, reaching toward the sky. Use some natural materials here so we can have a little bit of a wood-like veneer or true wood veneer on this. So that's an opportunity. It makes a statement while the rest of the media center stays relatively quiet, simple. Moving up one floor, we see on the right-hand side, that's the floor plan. So again, we have the main corridor on the second floor that runs by. We have a central entry again. In this case, you can see 2/3 of the space is really filled with a lot of activity. The librarian is also centrally located, so upon entry, you'll naturally see the librarian. Librarian has good visibility of the entire space. Behind the librarian is a makerspace, and this is considered kind of a clean space, makerspace, whereas the STE or technology rooms will have sinks and lots of other stuff, opportunities for maybe messier work going on. The main area that faces out towards the front of the school and grabs daylight is what we see here as the group area. It's got a few seating areas on each side and a classroom area in the middle. Again, it's surrounded by a perimeter of very tall shelving to maximize the volumes that we can fit in of books. But anything out in the middle of the floor is movable, including the chairs and tables. And the idea is that this room actually may be configured in a number of different ways to host, whether it's an option for faculty meetings or guest speakers or other types of things that can occur here. There is a little counter and reference area that looks down on the two-story opening, or the opening to below. And there's also a reading area or a lounge, kind of some soft seating, not a storytelling area for grades 3 and 4, but more of just a fun reading area in this zone. Both the storytelling and the reading, which you see on this side of the media center, are what you'll see when you walk in the lobby. You'll see a glass window that looks at these kind of storytelling and reading areas, so it's a nice visual upon entry to focus on the arts, tech, and media spaces. I can move on to art and tech. I don't know if there's any questions on the media center or thoughts or ideas. We're continuing to collect ideas.
I'm just curious what kind of clean makers, what do you do in a clean maker space? I don't know. Do you have any thoughts of what types of activities might occur there?
So I think when we've sort of seen them in other places, it's really an opportunity for kids to, if they have an idea that has been generated in their mind, to be able to create like the physical embodiment of that. When we have them in the high school, that a lot of art takes place there, a lot of projects take place there, and they don't necessarily have to be tied to STEAM learning. So I think that might be the vision for it at this point in time.
I was just, the clean part I was curious about, because the creative process doesn't tend to be that tidy sometimes, so I guess I was curious how this.
And I might be interpreting it incorrectly, but I think the way I understood it from what Bob said is less of, like, I think those things can still happen. Like, you can still create and build and do things, but it's not going to have, like, the, to use your example, sinks and other things that might be more, like, part of a science technology experience. But I think, like, we would love to use that as a space that kids can still design, create, build, kind of make a mess, but without maybe some of those other elements that Bob was talking about.
Yeah, maybe it's helpful to think about when we do something like have the kids take a look at what water erosion looks like. So they are sprawled out on the floor with great big buckets and sand, and they're running water through it, and there are obstacles, and we watch the way the water goes. There will be sand and water and all of that all over the place at the end of that particular assignment, which makes it a little bit different, I think, from a clean makerspace. If that's helpful.
Nobody likes to call it messy makerspace.
Yeah, we heard, that, you know, there could be dirt and sticks, there'll be a lot of things coming in, you know, a lot of connections to outside, so not in this space, but in the other spaces, certainly. So these are just some inspiration examples.
Oh, they actually find books on a lot of road, a lot of cars.
So you can see, just using natural themes, having fun with some of the furniture, having a modest level of built-ins, but making it age appropriate.
It's fun.
And certainly, we can work, you know, the graphics and imagery into the wall, into, you know, any of the woodwork that we have. Some of the furnishings that are shown here are kind of fun. They, it's soft seating, but it works in a lot of display of books or the easy access. One of the things we heard, particularly at the lowest grade levels, is there isn't really an efficiency we're looking for in what we call volumes or lining up books. The books really want to be face out, or a lot of them do, because a lot of the children select their books that way. They need a draw, something that attracts them. So there's a lot of focus on display, particularly at the younger grades. These are some more images that show, you know, having fun with, on the left, just acoustic ceiling treatment that can take inspiration from woodlands. Some of the screens that we're talking about where we want a little bit of separation within the space, both a little bit acoustically, but still maintain visibility. We can have fun with the patterns there, or just on the wall surfaces. This, on the far right, is an example of acoustic treatment. It can come in square panels, but it can come in hexagons too, and just a little bit of treatment takes something that's functional and makes it kind of fun. And these are some isometric views. So this is a cutaway that looks down into that lower floor, the second grade collection, and then up one floor. You can see the layout of the space. There's elbow room and the ability to move and manipulate. We are continuing to have user group meetings, so we're getting into the furnishings in a little bit more detail. Don't expect any plan changes, but certainly even further into construction documents will be, which is the next phase, will be getting even more specific about the furnishings that are desired. As far as the art rooms go, they're located on the floor above the art and science and technology rooms. So here we see the two rooms that are connected. They're kind of back to back, and this was a preference from the art teachers to have shared kiln and shared storage space, but still connect the rooms. So within the kiln room, we're actually revising our plans. We have two kilns. I'm not sure if one of them is existing, but we got very specific information about them. And our preference is to locate them right on the exterior for the direct vent, make it very economical and functional. This is not showing that, but that's what we're looking to do. These rooms, as you remember, look over a little bit of rooftop for the administration and nurse area below. It's an opportunity, if not now, in the future, to maybe utilize the roof or potentially have a green roof system there that can be a teaching tool. One of the things that we're going to do is where we have the windows here, we'll drop a couple of the windows down to the ground in case you plan to add a door in the future. But as of right now, we're not making the roof habitable. It's just there as potential. One of the fun things we heard from the art teachers as well is we've got some window out to the corridor. And it's a very inexpensive way to not only put art on display, but they felt they could line up some of the three-dimensional or other work inside the room and even draw a curtain, so it basically becomes a display case that's part of the room. So it can be interactive, interchangeable. From a security point of view, the curtain could always stay closed, but it just provides kind of a fun little display area naturally built in. In art rooms, you'll see this in the science and tech rooms as well. All the sinks and the cabinetry are really kept around the perimeter, and then the floor is free with movable furniture. That's to keep the room very flexible long-term, depending on how you might use it. Both of these rooms do have a little area rug space in front of the teaching wall, projection wall, which was requested. And then I believe these are four-person tables, kind of art tables, that have stools associated with them. They're all low, they're not counter height, but kind of like a little bit of a different vibe, different furniture than you would find in a classroom. I don't know why we did a 3D image of the corridor instead of the art room, but there's the corridor. This is just sort of an aerial view, shows you some of the same things we've talked about. We try to maximize, we've got a lot of storage, but even some of the sliding panels on the storage has marker surface on it, so it makes it kind of dual use. There's multiple sinks, one of them is handicapped accessible, two of them are just sort of deep sinks, and then we have the big slop sink that is very useful for various projects. And then onto just the science and tech rooms. These are located adjacent to the art rooms. Actually, two of them are adjacent to the art room. One is down adjacent to the media center. This, what looks like a long room here, is actually a science and technology room adjacent to the media center. And there's a little bit of hallway outside that was required for a few reasons. We need a second means of egress or exit out of the media center, which happens here. But also we had the proportions of this area of the building didn't require us to use it all for the science and technology room. The square footage is just here what you see. But this is a perfect example of some of the opportunities that you have built in. There's a little two-story opening to below, and that may or may not be used for some of the STE experiments, but you can imagine an egg drop with parachutes or other types of things. Wouldn't say paper airplanes, but there's also, within that corridor space, we're not considering this wasted space, but the wall in that breakout area could be a peg wall system. Some may remember seeing this in our Easton School project, where you can add gears, play with it, make it do something, learn a little bit about some science and technology. So animating or utilizing even corridor space for these opportunities is what we imagine maximizes your opportunities. They can just look pretty and stay in place, or they can be interactive pieces. So this is just an aerial view of those rooms. I think we're still developing those two, but that's, any questions on art and tech?
Questions from everybody?
Screw.
Yeah, I'll just say, this is, I mean, these presentations, especially in the media center, are just incredibly exciting, because what it shows is what this facility is going to allow the educators to do within this space. When we think about the creative ways they're using the spaces at Elmwood and Hopkins now, and to see the different breakout opportunities, even the different furniture configurations to allow for breakouts, differentiated instruction, independent work, maker work, all of these things that the building will now accommodate, is, for me, why all of us up here are doing this. So I think this is really energizing to see this level. And the other thing that in particular I just want to highlight, Bob, because I know you mentioned it a couple of times, was you talked about user groups. And again, I think as you heard from us at the last meeting, from at least most of the voting members of the committee, we're not the ones who are going to be working in this building every day. So what we really want to hear is from the educators and what they want and what's going to allow them to create the best educational environment, and the fact that that is happening and producing these great results is really exciting. So thank you.
And you may remember back to a meeting we had with the MSBA a very long time ago, where they encouraged us to do more with science, and we are now working with a science consultant to revamp the curriculum before we're even into the building.
That's great.
It's good.
All right, so we go from all that exciting stuff to permitting? Is that?
Yes, yeah.
I hate to be the one
Should've
to bring
reordered it.
everything down. I must have known that there was gonna be an accident blocking both lanes in Allison, so.
Is that the schedule, Chris?
Yeah.
It will be the schedule, but for the MIPA permitting update, just a couple of milestones that are coming up. We're working with John to make a connection with the South Asian Community Group in Hopkinton to establish forum date. We're gonna create I use the brand name, Survey Monkey, but a survey that can be filled out that will solicit the location where the commenter is from so that we can track it and share that with MIPA. What they're interested in the project, any comments they have on the project, and whether they'll be sending kids to the school. We think that those 4 questions really will be able to capture any positive or negative feedback that the community has specific to the census block that we're asked to target by MIPA. We're going to work with HCAM and John to set up a community forum once we pick a date and try and do it as a hybrid meeting to the greatest extent possible so that we give as many people as possible in that area the opportunity to comment. We've also reached out to the town clerk to get the addresses of the targeted area so that we can put together a mailer where we'll distribute the survey targeted to that specific group, as well as advertising the forum, and then hoping to execute that in the second half of March. So we expect it to be coming up soon. On the broader permitting side, we're close to completing the survey for the street so that we can begin further discussion about the parking. So we wanted to be able to begin that discussion traffic. So the traffic impacts that will need to be mitigated and how that develops once we have accurate assessment of how much of each yard will be perceived to be lost in the right-of-way, and how we can mitigate that as it develops so that we only encroach on what we need to minimize the impact to the most affected residents. So we're hoping that that discussion is going to happen over the next couple of weeks, and that'll lead up to, I had sent an updated schedule to the group just prior to the meeting, and within that, the one thing that changed was some of the latter dates. So mid-March, we're hoping that we can get to the point of discussing traffic and permitting a little bit more, and that will build up to our pre-meeting with the Design Review Board and the Planning Department, where we expect especially traffic to be a considerable discussion point. We're hoping to do that in late March, and that will build up to trying to get on before the Planning Board sometime around early May, if not earlier. I think they have a meeting mid-April that we may be too aggressive to reach, but May 6th looks like it's going to be the first Planning Board meeting. That's really the extent of where we're at with that.
Just a couple of, well, first of all, to add on to the MIPA related outreach and forum piece, I have a meeting with a couple members of the board of the South Asian Circle tomorrow. So we'll just finalize the partnership with them, which is mostly around marketing and outreach. That will get taken care of. The question I have with Planning and Design Review Board is, should we be at this point reaching out and to the Planning Board and the Design Review Board to share this proposed schedule with them, so that they are at least have a high level awareness of when we're going to be asking for time on their agendas?
So unrelated to this specific project, we recently began the permitting process on the Hopkins project it was Dan and myself as well there, and we did their pre-meeting. What they told us in that meeting is that they have a rolling schedule of engagement on the planning board, so they like to have a pre-meeting where they bring together as many of the stakeholders as possible. As part of that pre-meeting, you'll go through the various concerns that they might have or things that you should prepare for in advance of your submission. They gave us a rough idea of about a month in order to go from the submission to getting on a meeting agenda, but they don't have a preset standard, so it's not like if you apply by this date, you'll be at this meeting. They sign the meeting once they receive the materials. As part of the outreach, we're expecting the Perkins is going to work to schedule that
initial meeting sometime around the 25th of March.
Okay.
And so that's really the first outreach to town planning that we're going to be trying to have that meeting. And so they'll work with us to bring the right stakeholders together for that initial meeting.
Okay.
So moving on in the agenda.
Hang on, just, are there any other, we just want to make sure we give space for any other questions on permitting or any of that plan. Okay, and then the other thing I just want to put a big circle around, I know not for Vertex, but for the rest of the committee, is that MIPA filing is due on April 30th, which means that we need to have completed the outreach, completed the forums, allowed sufficient time, all of those pieces when we make that filing. So that's kind of the timing we're working under to keep this on track.
Yeah, there are a few other meetings in there. There's a stakeholder meeting that they like to have. And as we get closer and engage better with the community itself and have a sense of the, how much of that engagement they reciprocate, it'll better inform how we approach those additional steps. And along those same lines, then my next point was deadlines. So MIPA was one of those deadlines that we're looking at. We do have, you'll note in the schedule, sometime around the 15th of March, MIPA requires a 45-day notice that you're intending to file. It's called a 45-day notice, but it's really a 45 to 90-day notice, so you're not locking anything in. But it tells them that it's coming, they advertise that it's coming, and you'll work towards a deadline at that point, which would be the earliest that you could apply to MIPA. In addition to that, one of the other changes in this version of the schedule is we took a hard look at where we are with drawing issue and estimate timelines. And what we found was that we fall very close to school vacation week in April with some of those timelines. So at the moment, we're looking at the drawings being issued on the 22nd of March. So that would be when the DD set would come out. We'll circulate it to the committee so they have the opportunity to comment if they wish. We'll do our own drawing review as part of that. We also kicked off with the MSBA's assigned commissioning agent for both building envelope and MEP. The MSBA owns the contract with the commissioning agent, and so they'll work with us to do drawing reviews themselves as part of that submission on the 22nd. They're also going to work with ourselves and the school district to establish what they call owner's project requirements. And the owner's project requirements is really what you want your building to do at the end of the day. And then they'll use that as the benchmark or measuring stick to ensure that the design and eventually the constructed design accomplishes what it set out to do with both the designer and the contractor. So that's continuing to develop, and we had a kickoff with them a few weeks ago. In addition to that, we will be headed in April towards the next submission to the MSBA, so that'll be the design development submission. So right now we're expecting to have the estimate reconciled sometime around the 17th of April. We'll present it to the working group the next day, and then we'll present it to the ESBC the following week. This was originally April 23rd was going to be our MSBA submission date, so we just kicked that back a couple of days so that we would have time to react to whatever comes out of that estimate in doing our final submission. The MSBA typically likes to do a meeting that's fairly vanilla, just to go through their checklist of, will you have this for design development? And so we'll be reaching out to them to let them know that we're expecting to submit that DD submission on the 26th. And they'll want to schedule a meeting probably sometime in the next 3 or 4 weeks to just go through what they expect to receive as part of that DD set so that we can make sure it's as complete as possible. Any other questions on meetings?
I don't think this necessarily, well, these are meetings, but it's not on this schedule, but I just want to make sure that the whole committee is aware. We have also begun having some meetings with the abutting property owners, which we had before the vote, but we started those up again in the new year to start talking about what specific landscape mitigations that we're gonna wanna make as part of this. It was obviously our promise to them as a group to make sure that we were gonna that we're gonna limit the impact as much as we could, so that process has already started, with, Vertex, Perkins, the landscape architects, and from the committee perspective, Mike and I have been taking point on that. So just wanted to make sure everyone was aware that that was going on in case you happen to talk to anybody who is in a butter.
And while I won't go into depth, we are having a meeting with police, fire, and EMS this Thursday to cover, excuse me, to just review where we're at with developing the security that's inherent in the school. I know it's a topic that everyone wants to know that we are tackling, but I won't go into depth about it, sort of what that entails.
Any questions, anything else in the process that might be going on, sort of apart from these committee meetings that anybody is wondering about?
I'd like to be involved in the forums, just so you know.
Yeah.
If-
Yeah, the forums, I think, will definitely open up to the
Yeah,
whole committee,
yeah,
so.
good.
Yeah.
Thank you.
We're anticipating about a 3-week lead to picking a date about 3 weeks ahead, and we'll have a lead up to it. So we want to make sure we have time to get a mailer out, and get adequate notice, and get as high attendance as we can, so we solicit as much feedback as we can. Sure.
And is there any benefit for us to be attending the planning board meetings when you're doing the presentation?
The town should have someone representing the town's, it's the town representing themselves to the town, but we always like to have a designated representative of the town as part of those planning board discussions, because we think it's helpful as the stakeholder to say, yes, I endorsed this design, this is how I want to proceed, and also to hear their feedback firsthand, so that when we ask you to make decisions based on their feedback, you've had a say in the room, and it's not just something we're reporting.
And I would say to the extent schedules allow, when I went through this process last time, actually being at the planning board, even though I wasn't, at the table in the discussions, to hear the discussions was helpful for the decisions that we subsequently had to make. So those are ones, if you can attend as an ESBC member, highly recommended. If you can't, I don't know if they televise and record theirs, but if they do, it might be worth taking a look at, just because I think those provide helpful context to the extent that there are decisions we have to make based on our planning board meetings.
So by our next meeting on March 12th, we'll probably have more definitive dates for the planning board?
Yeah, we're looking to set up that pre-meeting now.
We likely won't get an actual planning board hearing date until after we submit and they review the submission.
Okay.
So we use their most likely scheduled date for this calendar. And as we've discussed many times, ultimately, the permitting part there that's gonna affect schedule the most is MIPA, not the planning board. I think we have ample time to sort out whatever challenges are brought to us by the planning board as they review what's proposed.
Okay. All right.
How many community forums are planned?
I think that's an agenda item for tomorrow, to be honest. I think for MIPA, we had planned to do one that was targeted specifically at the MIPA designated environmental justice community, and dependent upon what turnout is and what the comments are, I think we'll react to that. The community, through their votes, had a very strong endorsement of the project at town meeting and at the ballot. So we're optimistic that a meeting to discuss the value that the project brings to the community will be positively received. We do know, as you know firsthand, the first time that we tried to do a forum in that specific portion of town, it wasn't well attended. And so we're hopeful that outreach that's more informational and less vote dependent might be more encouraging for the residents to get out and share what they think.
Yeah, I think logistically, it's one forum between now and sort of the spring, And then we'll see as we go if there's a need or a reason to do additional forums, but will that forum and the comment, the survey comment kind of opportunity will be opened up to the whole town.
And the opportunities to comment on the project start to shift at this stage of the project. So the planning board notifies all abutters, and it's an open opportunity for any abutters or any community members to come and comment on the project. So that becomes a forum to share thoughts on the project. What we see in other towns is it's usually up to the school committee how much they want to continue to do forums. We've had communities that continue to have bi-monthly forums all the way through construction to just share every little thing that happens because the community's excited about it. We have communities that choose to do information sessions that they might post on their local, like in this case, HCAM. And we see communities who get their vote and say, we did our forums, the community approves, I think we're done with forums. So it's really up to the school committee or the school building committee to make the decision about how much engagement you'd like to do and how much information sharing you'd like to do beyond our well-attended, publicly noticed ESBC meetings.
Okay.
All right, so the last item that we had backtracks a little bit to a discussion that we had during the lead up to the funding vote. At the time, we talked about MSBA reimbursement for sustainable initiatives. So this is the decision to pursue LEED, the decision to pursue more environmentally friendly building, and also the decision to proceed with what's called the state's opt-in code in terms of the energy code. The state ties that to reimbursement rate, so in addition to the enhanced sustainability, you get 3% additional reimbursement rate as a result of that. And then the opt-in code gives you an additional 1% reimbursement on top of that. If you recall at the time that we were discussing the budget, we spoke about how we had added additional funds to the budget to support the steps that would come in along the way to ensure that we met the needs of that reimbursement or of that sustainable initiative, with one of those being the opt-in code. The reason I bring this up now is twofold. One, we are at the point where we've learned that LEED is in the process of coming out with their next version. As LEED, or as the U.S. Green Building Council has evolved LEED over the years, and LEED is our way with it, we're satisfying some of those sustainable initiatives. As they've evolved over the years, they've come out with newer versions to ensure that they're still pushing sustainable building forward. One of those new versions is scheduled to begin on Friday. And so, in the interest of locking in the level that LEED is currently at as of today, Perkins has recommended that the ESBC register the project with LEED, which would lock us into the current level of requirements that LEED currently has. If the town was to wait, then we would instead be into their next evolution of that program. The cost to do so is $1,350. It would require a signature, most likely by you, John, to certify that the town is registering the project, and it would lock us into this, I believe, the scorecard that we had shared as part of our original proposal when we talked about sustainability early on. We've seen this happen over the years many times, and we find it's beneficial to sort of commit to the system you know, then risk the system you don't. So we would recommend that the ESBC vote tonight to register the project with the Green Building Council under the, I forget what version.
4.0.
Under the 4.0 version of LEED.
Questions?
Now, That's the specialized stretch code we're talking about?
That's the next one.
That's the
That's the
next
next point.
Oh, okay, forget it then.
So the four-
I'll wait and
Yeah.
ask the question.
The 4.0, what they've done for the past year or two is they've floated out version 4.1,
Yep.
which is the one they're going to.
Yep.
And they've allowed us to use 4.0 and 4.1 interchangeably with different points.
Yeah.
They're sunsetting 4.0 on Friday.
Okay.
And they're going to 4.1.
Okay.
The thing that hurts us is the way that the energy points are now calculated, we would lose about 10 points. Because they're basically trying to catch up with IECC. So now they're gonna be way over on the other end, because they're gonna be asking people to stretch themselves to now go where everyone's going under the IECC, because then it'll
That's with
just.
4.1, correct?
That's with 4.1, so, now that we're going where we're going with the new building codes, they're saying, well, that's not a stretch anymore. Now we need to create the next
Yep.
the next stretch for everybody. We would prefer to be under the old.
Bill?
No, he answered my question, thank you.
Great. Anyone else?
And the cost to register the 1,900, whatever number you just said, the cost, is it the same whether we do it? Is it higher because we're trying to sneak into the old one, or is it just, it's
No,
important
that's
to have
the,
that cost no matter what?
well, there's a few different costs. This is just the first cost to certify it. There's also another cost coming for the actual process, which is based on the square footage of the building. And there's a base cost and then plus square footage. So that usually ranges between $10,000 and $15,000. And that's the cost for them to review everything and give you the certification. This is just the cost to get the project on their radar and in the process.
Okay.
And recognized, and they give you a number back, and then you're in.
And that's, sorry, go ahead.
Both of those costs will be incurred, whether it's for 4.0 or 4.1. There's no cost.
There's no difference. They've basically been doing it for a couple of years now with
Yeah.
both, and they're just trying, I think they're trying to make their own process a little easier by not having these two different going at the same time.
Great fun.
Thank you for the heads up.
Yeah, that's pretty good. So if there are no other questions, I would seek a motion to, what am I seeking a motion?
Motion to register the project under lead 4.0 at a cost of $1,350.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Is there a second?
Second?
Motion by Mike, second by Jagroot. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, it's unanimous, 6-0.
Just finishing my note.
Yeah.
And I'll have you sign it before we leave, so I can scan it and send it over to
Okay. I can do
them
that.
and pay them.
That brings us to the end of the agenda. Is
One
there
more.
Anything? Oh, sorry. Oh, right, the stretch. Yep.
So, as part of the sustainable initiatives, as I mentioned, there was an additional 1%. Now, it's important to point out in the context of this discussion that 1% represents about $1 million in reimbursement from the MSBA for a project this size. The big difference between the opt-in code, and Dan will help me with the things I get wrong here, is that as part of previous energy codes, they've been, for years, sort of towing the line between prescriptive, where they tell you exactly what to do, and performance-based, where you justify what you're doing to meet a certain performance standard. The biggest change in the new code is that affects us, is that in addition to that performance-based code, the opt-in code adds verification that you're meeting the performance that you say you are. For a project this size, when you get over 20,000?
20,000 square feet.
When you get over 20,000, they rely on, similar to LEED being a third party, they rely on third-party verification systems in order to verify. And so in that case, you may have heard references in the past to Passive House. And that's essentially what Passive House serves as in this context of this project. Passive House would observe the tests that we're doing as part of the project. And when they observe the tests, they are verifying that those tests are meeting the performance that we said they would as part of this opt-in energy code. There is additional costs for those tests. Some of them are very expensive. And there are additional costs as well for paying the person who's responsible for certifying the passive house certifier, is that language correct? The passive house certifier to say, yes, you do meet this, and to complete that process for a project this size. So that's tied to this opt-in energy code. Pursuing that extra 1% was something that we agreed to do for the very reason that for that additional cost to build the enhancements, to do the additional testing, and to verify that additional testing, that's why you're getting the extra $1 million. The reason that we bring this up today is that Dan's in the process of working with his consultants to make sure he has everything in line as we move into that next stage to do drawing reviews and other things that are related to that passive house. Specific to tonight's discussion is the construction administration portion of that passive house work. So the proposal that Dan has is for roughly, it would be about $88,000 for that construction administration work to verify, and that's sort of a minimum to observe each test, to certify that you're meeting the performance that this opt-in code requires you to meet. There are other aspects of this, with that being the most onerous. So we're doing electrification. Electrification certainly helps in that respect in terms of establishing that we meet the requirements of that third-party certification system. But in the same way that LEED is sustainability, Passive House is verifying that you have the appropriate energy performance. The discussion tonight is not about whether to accept the proposal that Dan has available to him, which is about the $88,000 with markup. It's the question of the committee is that given there aren't a lot of Passive House certifiers out in the marketplace, the committee would have the option to go out as a public procurement process, if you wished, and solicit quotes from multiple Passive House certifiers for the construction phase services that are necessary. We could do that procurement, come back to you with recommendations, and the committee could select that consultant that way. Or if the committee is comfortable, it's certainly convenient to go with the available consultant that Dan has available to him, because Dan will be absorbing a consultant to do drawing reviews and other things up until the start of the construction process. So this person will do that drawing review. If we go out to separately procure it, independent of Dan, as the commissioning is procured, there may be additional costs for that drawing review that the town needs to absorb as part of that procurement. So we wanted to just solicit the committee's opinions on that topic so that we can make the decision as to whether or not we should begin that procurement process, or if we should continue along the line we are and come back and report to you more directly about the proposal that Dan has in hand and have you consider that at a future meeting.
So there's one more piece to this. There's actually, the code has two pathways. One is Passive House, the other is called Teddy. And we're going down both, because right now it's a new code, it's unclear how this is all gonna work out. So we're gonna chase both pathways, because we wanna make sure we meet one of the two, right? So that being the case, if we find out that the Teddy pathway is actually the one that we're gonna go down, then we wouldn't need to do a third-party Passive House certification. So we're kind of preparing you for we might need a third-party Passive House certifier, which is required by, it's almost like a LEED was a decade ago, when it was new and there were all these people out there that you needed to hire to do it, and then as soon as everybody learned, then we all do it in-house, and that's no longer required. But now Passive House is basically new. There's these different people who are involved with it. This is one of them, which is this third party, basically construction administration, eyes in the field guy, who does just that.
Can I just ask a clarification really quick? So in the case that we don't go with passive, let's say we say to go with this consultant and we don't go with Passive House. We don't pay the $88,000.
Correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
We don't need 'em.
We're not locking, okay.
Yeah, and that's why I think we should, we're meeting, we've had Passive House do a study already on the project to best understand if it is possible to do this building that way. We're meeting with them next week and our team to discuss that, the results.
Okay.
Because it says it can be, but we want to make sure that it can be sometimes means it can be, but you need to do all these things that you aren't doing or are very expensive to do, and we want to make sure we understand what it means.
I just wanted to clarify we were going on the hook for something that.
No, I don't think we're asking for a vote on it tonight either.
No,
I
we're
think
definitely not
We're just
asking for a
telling
vote tonight.
it's out there and it may be needed.
Mike?
Yeah, part of it is awareness, and if I can give you a little bit of background, there's a National Energy Code. It's a book about this thing. And different states have opted to make it more restrictive. Massachusetts, about 10 years ago, took the base code and said, now we're gonna have a stretch code. And you, the communities of the state, most of them adopted it, the stretch code was more onerous than the base code. In other words, at the end of the day, everything is better. Okay? Now, it's been about 10 years, and so suddenly, a year and a half ago, they come out and said, now we're gonna have a specialized stretch code. And if you remember at town meeting, there was only 3 articles, ours was one, the other one was the specialized code. Mike Shepherd got up there like a dummy and said, no, you shouldn't vote for this. All that being said, you know, we've presented this building as energy efficient, top of the thing, and it's gonna cost the taxpayers a lot of money to keep it heated, no matter what we do, over the next 50 years. I would say that we should opt in, you know, right now, we don't have the specialized energy code. It's coming up at town meeting again, and hopefully it'll fail again. But from our perspective in the school, to protect the consumers, I think that we, as a committee, said, you give us the most efficient school you possibly can. And if it's under the specialized stretch code, that's good. It's not gonna affect your house, it's not gonna affect your house, or your house, or your house. But the building we're building is top of the line, and it's, you know, it's gonna be efficient. So what I would say is, the message we're gonna send these folks is, give us the most energy efficient building you get, and we'll take care of the costs otherwise. That would be my input, because what's happening with this energy thing, it's a big political piece of crap, you know, and everybody says we're gonna be all efficient by 2025 or 2030 or 2035, and we can't even get friggin' transformers to put in the road on Main Street. So, but from our perspective, for this school, I would say we design it to the highest standard, because if next May town meeting passes it, we'll have to do it anyway, because this building's not gonna start for another year. So keep in mind, you know, that's just my thinking, and kind of the history, you know, Maine doesn't have this, New Hampshire doesn't have this, we're in Massachusetts, we have this.
So,
So,
if I can just add 2 clarifying comments. One, because I don't think it can be said enough. Irregardless of whether town meeting adopts the opt-in code, one of the advantages of pursuing it is because the MSBA is giving you an
Yeah.
additional $1 million.
Right.
And if the town adopts the code, the MSBA is still giving you
yeah,
$1 million specific to the school.
yeah.
If the town adopts the code, to my knowledge, for average Hopkinton citizen number 2, no one's showing up to give that guy $1 million to renovate his house and meet that new opt-in code. But the agreement with the MSBA won't change. And the committee has already made the decision that we're pursuing that opt-in code
Yep.
as part of the funding vote. And we have a budget to support some of the uncertainties of that code for that reason. The biggest decision that we're looking for feedback today is one of the, I'm gonna call it the spirit of the code, is the idea that this verification is third party. So you're bringing someone in who will verify that Dan's team did what Dan's team said they're gonna do, and they're not directly connected or financially connected to Dan.
Right.
Versus the convenience and synergy of Dan's gonna have to hire someone to do some of that stuff anyway, so it's more cost effective to utilize the consultant that Dan's bringing in, knowing that there aren't a ton of those consultants in the marketplace.
Well, I guess that's my question to you, Dan. So it sounds like this is such a new procedure that you don't have a history of even knowing if we were to go to the market, could there be a substantial difference in cost versus the 80+ that you're working with your current?
Couldn't tell you.
We
what
just
you're
don't
going
know.
to see. From a fee, I would think it's gonna be higher, because as Chris mentioned, I'm absorbing some of it on the design side. So there's another $25,000 or $30,000 that I'm absorbing on the design side, because it's part of the design. And if he's on my team, I'm gonna have him just review it as part of it, and then when it gets into construction, it's almost like it's a testing service then. So that's why I'm kind of pushing it towards away, because it's not really, but I'm not looking for him to look at my details as much as I'm looking for them to make sure that the contractor builds the building the way it was designed.
It's not unlike single-family homes. And when a builder comes out and submits plans, he gets a third party to look at the plans. The third party says, yeah, it looks like if you build it this way, it's gonna meet this minimum requirement, okay? And then the house is built, and just before we give a final inspection, this third-party guy goes in and says, hey, yep, you made it. Instead of a 55, you got a 52, that's better, and you're okay. Or, very seldom do they say, at least in my experience in town, that, no, it's over what the minimum is. And there's things you gotta do, but, you know.
Tim?
Will the MSBA take your person that's working for you as a third party? Will they accept that as a third-party review?
In this case, the MSBA, I don't think is gonna have any, comment on who does it.
We can certainly ask that question.
Yeah.
It's very new.
Whoever's giving us the $1 million, are they gonna consider that person?
And I'd actually ask Dan the same thing, because the way that the code is written is it's an approved third party, and it gives the authority of approving the third party to the building inspector, who's the person who
Yeah.
regulates the code, who's the AHJ who has jurisdiction over the code. But in this case, because it's opt-in for the benefit of the MSBA, the building inspector at the time that this is built would have to have the opt-in code, because otherwise he has no one to approve. And so you have this idea that you're trying to meet floating over the project that may not necessarily be the rules of the road in Hopkinton, but it is to satisfy. And so, but that's where in the same way that modern commercial construction is what's called controlled construction. And so Dan's team will all stamp that, we're gonna do what we need to make sure the building's built properly. And the building inspector is gonna say, well, you gave me an affidavit saying you're gonna build it properly. This is along that same lines of, we're gonna say we're gonna build it properly, and then we're gonna give you this piece of paper from this other guy who says we built it properly. It's along that same approach to how this is. The biggest reason that we wanted to bring it up today is the speed of procurement.
Yeah.
So if we need to prepare an RFP, if we need to go out on the street, solicit bids, level those bids and bring them back to the committee, it takes a window of time that is much longer than if we allow Perkins to continue to investigate the Teddy option versus the passive house option, arrive at what they feel is the right way to move forward, present that right way to move forward to the committee, and have the committee vote on the costs associated with that at that time. That is a much shorter procurement window that's a lot easier to control.
So do we have any public procurement requirements for this? So like, I know there's the MSBA side, but then there's also just the public procurement requirements we have as a town.
There is public procurement requirements for this type of service in the same way that there would be public procurement requirements for any type of testing or inspection that you would do within the town. So you would still, generally the accepted way that it's done is there's an open procurement, which is publicly advertised, and goes out to a certain number of people based on the cost of the work. And then there is consultant procurement, where you've already engaged in a procurement process with us, with Perkins Eastman. You've signed agreements with us, and so we can, on your behalf, sign up consultants as an additional service, as this would be to Perkins Eastman, and bring that recommendation to the committee, and then they work as a reimbursable expense under Perkins Eastman's contract. So
Okay,
that is
like a
a
sub.
regularly accepted
That's a normal
practice.
way to do it.
Okay, so it operates just like a sub.
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Okay.
if you do it the other way, as Chris said, you're gonna have to find, or Chris is gonna have to find, 3 people
Yeah.
who can do this, and then bid it to each one of them equally, get all those numbers together, make those scopes leveled out, and present them for decision.
And you gave a great detailed explanation of the timeline. Is there a guesstimate on how long that is? Is it 6 months from now before you'll know whether Teddy or?
No, I think we're probably either at the next meeting or the one after that.
Oh, okay.
We'll know, because we're meeting on Passive House next week. We've already had the report done and already started down that road. Because we think that that's the easier of the two.
Which?
The Passive House is the more, the achievable, because the achievements are more concrete.
Okay.
It's like, do this,
Yep.
versus the Teddy, which is like, here's a bunch of inputs, put them into a model and see what happens.
And so we'd want to start very soon that procurement process, if that's the feeling of the committee, that you would rather have this be independent of the architect. If you're comfortable with the job that Perkins has done, and them having the contract of this verifier under their contract, as they already do for a lot of their peer reviews and a lot of their building envelope support, then we can continue to move as we have, and we'll bring it back to you at the decision point.
There's some I wouldn't do, like, so when we get to construction, we're talking about construction testing. That's one I won't do. So this one I feel comfortable that I can take on, and he's someone who fits into the envelope of what I'm doing, and it's okay that they're working for me. But at construction testing, they need to work for you. They
And-
can't work for me or for anyone else.
We'll typically procure the construction testing for the town. That's a typical reimbursable service that we do as part of our overall scope of services. So we'll go out and solicit those companies. And when we get to the actual construction period and we're trying to verify these things, it'll involve the testing company that we've procured based on the tests that Dan has specified. And they'll come in and say, was it done correctly or was it not done correctly, and perform the test. The consultant that we're talking about for Passive House is basically someone who is probably, in addition to Thrive, which is the building envelope commissioning agent that was assigned by the MSBA, they'll also be there watching the same test, saying whether or not it went properly. And so it's redundancy they're now building into the code that gets very specific to make sure that you're meeting the performance that you say you are.
So you're looking for tonight, you're not looking for a vote, you're looking for just a general consensus. Are we comfortable going the route of utilizing the consultant that through Passive House that Dan and Perkins Eastman have identified? And then you'll come back to us with, are we gonna do Passive House or Teddy? And if we are gonna do Passive House, then we would have a vote to
Yeah,
sign a
I
contract.
would say it slightly differently, which is, are you comfortable with the the consultant that Dan ultimately selects being a reimbursable service as opposed to a separately procured service through the architect?
My only question isn't so much on the direction we go, but this $80,000 potential item of cost, was that factored into the overall budget? Or is it such a new thing, or is this gonna maybe hit the contingency?
We did carry,
There is some.
I believe it's 300,000 in other administrative costs. And among the things that fall under that number that we justified to the MSBA was 2 things. One is additional costs that are incurred as part of the MIPA process. And the other is additional costs that are incurred in order to meet the opt-in energy code that we're pursuing,
Separate from the contingency.
separate from the contingency.
Thank you.
So, is anyone not comfortable proceeding with the recommendation that we've gotten from Perkins and Bertone?
As long as there's a favorable answer to your question, I think.
Yeah, we'll definitely run that down with the MSBA, but we actually went through that conversation and ultimately we arrived at, it's so new that they won't be able to answer the question yet. That was the consensus in the office, so, well, I've gotta reach out to them about our 3-day delay in the DD set anyway, so I'll add that question to our reach out.
They may not even know that you need
It's very likely.
a certifier outside of everyone else that's being provided, because this is actually a third set of eyes, because I have an envelope consultant too. So there is a lot of people looking at it, but it's critical, and then I think it's great to add yet another set of eyes, because it's a big building. And once it's built, it's very difficult to go back and fix things that could have been easy to fix had someone seen it. And with this many consultants going out, that this frequency, when the envelope's being put together, we have a much better chance at catching anything that the contractors don't get right.
So I think what you're hearing from the committee is general consensus that we are comfortable with moving forward, obviously with the caveat of checking with the MSBA. And then we'll have further discussions once you know which direction we're gonna go.
Yep.
Okay. All right.
That was my last item.
Okay. Does anyone have anything else? Currently on the agenda, or on the schedule, our next meeting is scheduled for Tuesday, March 12th. Is that still the right
That's
timing?
Still what we're planning on, yep.
So our next meeting will be Tuesday, March 12th at 6 PM right here. With that, I would seek a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, motion by Bill, breaking up Mike's shutout streak of making all the motions tonight, but second by Mike.
Shaking it up, buddy.
That's all right, I'm glad.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? No. Then we are adjourned at 7:15. Thank you to HCAM and have a good night.